Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's October 5th, 2021, and I don't have the right camera angle pointing to me because why is Carah laughing?
Start over.
Hello,
Sorry.
everyone. No, it's fine. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's October 5th, 2021. And today we are super excited to be hosting back in our Mormon Stories Podcast studios, the one, the only, the John Larsen. Hey, John Larsen.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Welcome back.
It's always good to be here.
Yeah. And we're joined by the Carah Burrell. Hey, Carah.
Hey, Johns. This is going to be another great live stream. Second one of the day.
We're stoked.
We're so stoked.
Yeah. So, as you guys know, we are so thrilled that John Larsen has come out of retirement, so to speak, and has expressed a willingness and indeed has acted upon that willingness to come here at least once a month to share with us his wit, his wisdom, his analysis of all sorts of things related to Mormonism. We've done many cool episodes in the past. I do want to say that we are up to like 99% of the Mormon Expression podcast episodes now being available on like 6 different platforms.
Wow.
We've got a few lost episodes that I need to add, but it's like literally like 6 or 7, and we've got 100% of your library. We're so grateful for everyone who is supporting the Mormon Expression Project. That's John Larsen's old podcast that we've helped along with John to bring out of retirement. So we're thrilled about that. But also we're thrilled to have John back to be sharing with us some more cool stuff. And today we are going to be talking about pioneers. We're going to be talking about handcart companies. And John has prepared an analysis of what we're calling, here's the official title, September 12th, 1856, the worst regional conference ever. That is the title that John has for us. John, you're laughing. Why are you laughing? Because
it's a silly title.
Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're all excited on the edges of our seats to hear what you've got for us, John. So sometimes you like to do a little bit of an intro and maybe even to talk about comments and past episodes. So is there anything you've got for us?
Yeah, we always do a kind of a step back. There were the 2 comments that I read over the last couple of weeks in particular, and they're ones that I've seen over and over again. The first one was something to the effect of that the writer, and I didn't write down her name. She said, "I'm so embarrassed," because she was talking about. I'm sorry, this is too early to start this stuff. This is not going to be an easy episode. She said she's so embarrassed because she believed all this.
She believed in Mormonism.
Yes,
and
yeah.
she was embarrassed. Your episode made her.
She was listening to the episode and she was expressing embarrassment that she believed it. I believed it all. We all did. And religion exploits some holes in our psychology. So there's things that we can prove wrong, and there's things that we can't prove wrong because they're just not provable. Like the famous example of the teacup circling the moon. You can't prove that there's not a teacup circling the moon. It is very unlikely, statistically very improbable, but you can't prove it. And that is a gap in our thinking. It comes from in psychology and in statistics and other things. We talk about type 1 and type 2 errors. A type 1 error is that you see the grass kind of shuffle a little bit and you think, oh my God, there's a tiger, and you run away. And you do that over and over again. And there's no tiger there. That's a type 1 error. You have a false positive. You misidentify something. A type 2 error is when you do not identify something that's dangerous to you. The people who are prone to commit type 2 errors do not survive. Every time I see the grass rustle, I think there's a tiger in the grass, and I'm really anxious and scared and depressed about it, I still live, which is one of the reasons human beings are anxious, scared, and depressed. If I do not see the tiger, I become dinner. I die. My genetic line drops out. That's also mixed in with the fact that we evolved to be group animals. Human beings can't survive on their own. So it's important for group cohesion. So religion evolves to fill in those gaps that we can't dislodge it from our psychology. If it wasn't there, then we would dislodge it. For example, if the Mormon Church were making a lot of claims that were easily falsifiable for everybody, then people would easily falsify it, but it doesn't. So the whole story, the whole mechanism, the whole thing, it wedges in our minds. It is a defect that we evolved, and there's no shame in having believed it and believed it ardently. There is nothing to be embarrassed about. It is part of the human condition. It's like being embarrassed because you got your period. It's nothing that isn't just normal and beautiful and part of living, even being wrong about things. It's what we do with it once we know that it's wrong, that is the embarrassing thing. But no, there's no shame whatsoever in having believed all of this.
So you want this person who made the comment to not beat themselves up and not to feel shame.
Yeah, there's no that even no matter how long it takes you to pull this stuff apart, it's really hard to deconstruct this thing. That's why we have to do little piece by little piece. All right. Another one that I see all the time. Don't you guys have anything better to do with your time than pull down something that people love? Well, tonight we're going to talk about some people who joined the church in England, in Scandinavia, in France even, sold everything they had, came across the plains, starved to death, and died. And we don't know who their names are. They're lost. They're gone. So we do these things to honor those people. I don't want their deaths to be in vain. That there's some real people who really, really suffered what we're going to talk about tonight. And I think that their identities and their persons should be honored.
And just this claim that we have nothing better than to just kind of like criticize the church and attack the church and fight the church, you know.
We got better things to do. But it's important. This is important for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Detangling this and going through the identity crisis that necessarily follows the faith crisis is hard. And we need people to help. And I realize that there's a lot of people who are in the church in a positive way, and that it's a positive influence on their lives and family. God bless those people. There's a lot of other people who are suffering, and it's those people I care about more.
I love it.
The last thing is kind of an intro. The Gloria Steinem said, "The truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off." I'm apologizing in advance. Usually I try to keep things kind of light and funny. I'll say this right now, there's nothing funny we're talking about tonight.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's very important that everybody know this stuff. This is rough stuff.
Thank you, John. Thanks for the warning. And if I know anything, Carah's going to do her best to defy that seriousness and still throw some jokes in anyway.
We'll try. We'll try.
She's zipping her lip.
I lost my voice again. Just kidding.
Carah, I just want to say, the super chats are lighting up. So I think we just need to thank some people really quick. Do you just want to do a couple shout outs?
Sure. Daniel. Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to try to highlight them, except for I have to click on them this way. Yeah, thanks for the $20. If anyone wants to donate either to Mormon Stories or you can donate through YouTube, through the Super Chats. And if you have questions or comments, you can throw some money towards us and we will be able to highlight them. Sydney says, thanks for the Taco Bell, Carah. And so close to spelling my name right, but that's okay because the sentiment still comes across. And so anyone who's donating, thank you so much. Trying to highlight as many as I can real quick, just so you know that you're appreciated and loved.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, and we just want to say that we feel like it's really important to compensate people for their contributions, and so we're paying Carah, we pay Gerardo, and we're paying John monthly for his study and his analysis and his thoughts. And so we never want this to be about the money. We don't do this for the money, but we to make this sustainable, your support means the world. So again, just thanks to everyone who is supporting us in whatever way you can support us. Thank you so much. All right. So John, now let's dig in.
All right, we're going to talk about the handcart companies tonight. Given church history, and the way the church handles and treats the handcart companies today, will be kind of our last big point of this thing that we want to return to. But in the meantime, we want to tell their story. The handcart companies happened for only 2 years, 1856 and 1857. I believe there were a total of 10 of them. There were 5 the first year and 5 the second year. And after that, the program was thrown away because it didn't work. It didn't work in many ways that we are going to go over tonight. But I really like to give context. So let's go back. So 1844, June, I do believe, Joseph Smith is assassinated in Nauvoo. And there is internal conflict in Nauvoo. Nauvoo, just like Kirtland, was a schism in the church. Now, there were outside forces agitating. You have to remember that in Nauvoo, Joseph Smith, declaring himself to be the president, declared himself to be the king of the world, set up, shadow governments and all sorts of things. Things were getting rough. So fast forward about a year and a half, winter 1846, Brigham Young leads the saints out of Nauvoo, crossing the Mississippi as it was frozen in that winter, and they head over into Iowa and Indian Territory, that's when this migration begins, and they settle into a town called Florence, which is in the suburbs of Omaha right now. And in the church, we always called it winter quarters. But even when it was winter quarters, it was Florence. So when you read, if you go and read this sort of stuff, then you'll find a lot of references to Florence. Oh, and by the way, I did skip out. Let me say, people have asked for the sources. So my primary source for tonight's discussion is the book Devil's Gate: Brigham Young and the Great Mormon Handcart Tragedy by Simon & Schuster. Was published in 2008.
Who's the author?
It was
Is that Bagley?
no. He's a guy.
Carah will look it up.
I thought I wrote it down, but I guess I skipped it.
No, we'll get that.
He's
Devil's
a
Gate.
historian who tends not to write about Mormon stuff. So his other works have been outside of the Mormondom. I tried to track him down years ago with Mormon Expression, and we never could get a hold of him.
David Roberts.
David Roberts, thank you so much.
Carah?
My other sources are the primary online sources. I used Wikipedia to verify some facts, and I use the church's sites too. Okay, so 1846, they're in winter quarters. They start getting ready to head out across the plains. And contrary to popular myth, they knew where they were going. They knew how much materials they needed to have. They knew all that stuff. So they set out, and I believe the first trek, by the way, was, if I'm pulling this out of my memory, so it was 148 individuals, and they crossed the plains in 101 days, I do believe, from winter quarters to Salt Lake City. And
101 days.
101 days. And interestingly enough, the most of them turned around and went back 3 days later. Well, they never talk about that, but they set a forward party there to start building forts and planting. The first field they planted is on the corner of State Street and I think 3rd South, because City Creek ran down the east side. You can look over there, and the first thing they planted was potatoes. Yeah. So, any more trivia you want? I don't know if they ever harvested those potatoes. You plant potatoes on July 24th in Salt Lake Valley. You're pushing it. Okay. So 1847, they arrive in the valley. They set up the forward team. They start moving the immigrations in 1848. 1848 is also the year when we had the first seagull. The seagulls come in, where the miracles happen. Now, the problem with the miracles, and I know I'm diverging, is we don't have any contemporary accounts of that. Those accounts all come later.
Wait, the seagull stories are also not necessarily true?
I'm sorry, John. So
next, you're going to tell me there's no Santa.
1848, they're starting to put there's no Santa, John.
Oh my gosh, I'm out. Carrie, you better.
1849, The Mormons are really raggedy. They are in terrible shape. They had actually stopped migration at this point, trying to figure out what to do. And then gold was discovered in California. The fastest route to the gold fields in Southern California was through Salt Lake City, and that became the main refueling station. And the Mormons got a lot of treasure that way. They were able to sell goods, trade for horses, do all that kind of stuff. There's an apocryphal tale that Brigham Young saw a guy heading out to California just pushing a wheelbarrow. He had everything he owned in a wheelbarrow, and that is supposed to be the inspiration for the handcarts. 1852, immigration's happening again. That's when the church publicly acknowledges and comes out of the closet with polygamy. So after that, there gets to be increasing pressure on the church. And we fast forward to 1855, and there is another disastrous year and another crop failure and another seagull attack. But there's nobody who ever talks about miracles during this one. So seagulls decimate the crops. They're kind of in a hard way. They're looking at a threat coming from the east, because the Mormons were agitators. Of course, the Utah War began the year later. In 1857 is when we get Mountain Meadows and Johnston's army coming into the Salt Lake Valley. So we're a year off from that. But the Brethren are starting to feel pressure to bring everybody in. Now, 1852 is when a whole bunch of men were sent off to the British missions, and the British and the Scandinavian missions. And at this time with the handcart companies, those saints are starting to come in because we still had the concept of gathering. There wasn't a stay where you are. These were all temporary things. If you joined the church and you were a Mormon, you were going to Salt Lake because they were building the city of God. There was no metaphor about it. It was absolutely real. When they said Zion, it's not like us today who use that term kind of tongue-in-cheek. They were saying it real. They were building the city of God in Salt Lake City as a temporary measure till they got back to Jackson County. So because that's where the actual Zion would be. But everybody had to gather in. So the 1855 also, because of these elements of the kind of starvation and other things, starts the Reformation, which is an interesting topic you can read about. The rhetoric starts heating up. And of course, that rhetoric ultimately leads, if you connect the dots, to Mountain Meadows.
It's Brigham Young's rhetoric, right?
Brigham Young and especially Jedediah Grant. And there were others. But if you read the Journal of Discourses from 1855, 1856, 1857, that's when they reinstituted, they excommunicated a bunch of people. They made everybody in the church get rebaptized. That's when they reinstituted the word of wisdom and some other elements.
And what's the sense of the rhetoric? Why are they feeling all heated up and emotional?
The leaders tended to be very verbally abusive to the members. That's the best way to say it. You read the talks, and we'll get this with the companies. When things weren't going well, they would blame the lack of faith and laziness of the saints.
So basically, the leaders were getting frustrated, and so they were turning up the heat on the members. It's kind of like the blame reversal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. When it's not working, who's to blame? It's not the leadership. They're divinely inspired, right?
Okay. Right.
So they call the British mission in, and Brigham Young has this great idea in the fall of 1855 to start the handcarts, and he writes an epistle, and he sends it out to the British missions, and I have a quote from it. He's talking about his new idea of doing handcarts, and he says, "If it is once tried, you will find it will become the favorite method of crossing the plains. They will have nothing to do but come along, and I should not be surprised if a company of this kind should make the trip in 60 or 70 days. I do know they can beat ox trains crossing the plains." So then he says that he goes on. He says that 15 miles that they should make 15 miles a day. Well, the problem is if you go 15 miles a day, you will get there in 70 days, covering 1,050 miles. From Florence to Salt Lake City was actually 1,300 miles. So when Brigham Young was talking about the rhetoric, he kept using numbers that were wrong from the beginning. Now, Brigham Young himself crossed the plains, I think, twice. William Clayton, his personal secretary, the guy who wrote not come. Yeah, he wrote come ye saints. He crossed the plains 17 times. So it was common for the brethren to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. The reason that I bring this up is by this time, I was looking at population estimates in Salt Lake. Reliably, we're looking at about 17,000 people. Brigham Young claimed at this time there were 77,000 people in Salt Lake City. There's no way there were 77,000 people in Salt Lake City in 1856. But let's say there were, or even 17,000 people. These people had all crossed the plains. We knew how much food it would take. We knew how much fodder it would take. We knew exactly the route. We knew the refilling stations. We had this down. We knew how to get from Florence to Salt Lake City. So when Brigham Young gets up in the beginning and basically, if you do the math, claims that they can get there in 60 days, that I don't know what's going on there. They're dropping the 300 miles. Now, my oldest is a through hiker. A through hiker, he goes backpacking for like 6 weeks at a time. And they just go as far and fast as they can go. So I asked him for some distances. So I said, well, a good, solid, trained, these are like extreme athletes on the trail. And these guys who are hiking every single day for months on end. And they use ultralight backpacks. So they use backpacks that are less than 30 pounds that they're carrying. And he said on a groomed trail, he said, you can make 20 miles a day for a while, but that means you're not stopping for meals. So Brigham Young was really planning on anticipating these guys with the carts making 20 to 30 miles a day pushing carts. So I want to establish that from the get-go, this wouldn't work. The math just wasn't there, and it'll get worse from there. So, but Brigham Young writes that letter out, and Franklin D. Richards, a member of the 12, prophet, seer, and revelator, is the president of the European or the British mission. And he takes this thing and he just runs with it. So he gathers all the saints, they book passage, they get them to the United States. And the reason they stopped in Florence is that was the end of the rail line. So they could take the rail from the East Coast to Florence. Some people went all the way down to Mississippi and took the Mississippi up, and then they head over to Iowa City. Actually, I'm saying it wrong. The jump off point was Iowa City, and that's where the rail line ended. From Iowa City, they had to cross over to get to Omaha, to get to Florence. So there was about 300 or so miles in that first route. So the first LDS outpost in the United States, therefore for all the people crossing the plains, was in Iowa City. And then from there, they would go to winter quarters to fuel up. And then from there, they really didn't have any fuel up opportunities till Fort Laramie, which is basically in the site of present-day Laramie, Wyoming. Okay?
That's a brutal trip.
It is a brutal trip.
It sucks. It sucks driving it. Mm-hmm. I hate driving that trip. So handcarts, unbelievable. So
Franklin Richards, he writes epistles to the saints, publishes Brigham Young things, says this is the divinely inspired thing. Handcarts are the way God wants us to go across the plains. So they head over. The first group of saints, we're going to talk about Willie and Martin. Now let's be clear. There are 3 companies that took off before Willie and Martin Handcart Company, and they all had fatalities, a lot of fatalities. And we really don't know how many fatalities. I think it was the 3rd company, but it might have been the 2nd. It's not really salient here. But there was a group of saints who joined them right before they jumped off. And the leaders refer to them as the Italian saints for some reason. All their names are French, and the ones who made it to Salt Lake City were all French. But nobody spoke either French or Italian. And the reason this is important is we think there were about 30 of them. They were never recorded in the official logs, even though we have journal entries of members of that group dying. So I'm just laying the groundwork. I'm not going to go through all of the nuanced discussions about how many people died on the plains. It is pretty clear the church is undercounting because we know that they're undercounting the head count for the groups. And also there were people, we'll get back into this, abandoned along the way that we don't know what happened to. The church does not count them as fatalities. So grandma collapses on the side of the route. This was a forced march. They did not stop for anybody, ever. then they just left her there. So we don't really know exactly how many people died, more so than the church claims. That's pretty clear. Okay, so they arrived. The first party that would become the Willie Handcart Company, which is the one that left, the fourth one out, and they left. They were about a month in front of the Martin Handcart Company the whole way. Willie himself had been a missionary. He'd been called in 52, these poor guys, and he had a wife and 3 kids at home. And he was sent out and did 4-year mission in Britain. And they told him the only way he could go home is if he commanded one of these handcart companies. So he was sequestered into this. Now, these guys, a lot of them had crossed the plains multiple times, so they were experienced on these sort of treks and journeys. So he was one of those. When they got there, they ran into the same problem that the 3 previous companies had. There were no handcarts. Even though they had been commissioned, nobody had actually done it. And it was worse than that. They had not purchased any lumber. So they had to buy green wood. If anybody's worked with green wood, matter of fact, if you go to Home Depot and buy a 2x4, that is not a green wood. That has been aged for about 2 years, I think, is how long they age them if they don't kill them. So they let them sit, and they let them sit under pressure to keep them straight. But if you go buy a 2x4 and set it up in your garage and watch that sucker, it will start to warp. It will start to bend. And that is a piece of wood that has been dried and aged and cut by modern standards. These guys did not have, they had green wood. They were not wagon builders. There were a couple, Chauncey Webb and Levi Savage, we'll talk about, who kind of knew what they were doing, but they were few and far between. So these European saints and the manifests of these guys, just like the church now, when we send missionaries out, we tend to not baptize the movers and shakers of society. So you look at these. I was reading one account. The woman is talking about the 20 people in her tent. She had 2 blind men, one guy who had lost his leg before they ever started, a widow who had like 5 kids. So the handcart companies weren't these stout men. There were stout men, but the men died at a much higher rate than women, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. So the first problem they had is they had to build these handcarts. Everything you know about the handcarts is wrong. They didn't have any metal. So the axle was made of wood, as was the gearbox, as were the elements of the wheel. Now, normally those wheels would have been shod in iron, but they decided to not iron shod the wheels on the handcarts to save money. And they thought, oh, the trip
Does that mean just cover the rims of the
right.
wheels?
So normally what you do, you take this hoop of iron and you heat it up, and then you drop the wheel in there, and then as it shrinks, it comes on tight, and then they'll nail it. And that's how it was done.
And that makes the wheel stronger, makes it last longer.
It's literally an iron wheel as opposed to theirs were only. Now I can't say only. There probably were some handcarts that, because some of the people had money, others didn't, and some of them didn't have money because they made them donate everything to the church. There's a sad tale of a rich Scandinavian who got caught up in the Martin Company, and they basically lost everything they had, and they had to cross the plains just destitute, absolutely poor. But this was, and I want to be clear, this was an administrative decision by the church to save money. And it was an administrative decision by the church they could have stayed in Iowa City. They could have stayed in Florence. They didn't have to come across. They had provisions to stay. There were people who had stayed there before. There were lots of times you read people who were in winter quarters for 2 years, 3 years, waiting for their chance to go across, because they didn't just go willy-nilly. They had actual companies that were organized to make sure everyone was safe and that they had enough provisions to get to the destination. So these were all administrative decisions. No iron was a decision by the church to save money. Brigham Young built the Beehive House in 1852. Brigham Young finished the Lion House in 1856. Will Bagley estimates that by 1856, Brigham Young was worth $150,000. That'd make him a vast multimillionaire. By this time, Brigham Young had enriched himself in these 10 years to be one of the richest men in the Western United States. And he would get more and more and more money. The money was there. They decided not to spend it on these saints. Okay, so would they the boxes? Let's see.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Were they? So would you go into a little bit more about what you mean by they came across to donate all their money to the church? Like they were living the law of consecration. Sorry, when they got to America.
Yeah. So at different stages they would ask them, but for this story I'm referring to, and I wish I had more detail about it. I'm sorry. There's a lot of facts here tonight, but when they got to Iowa, the Iowa City, they implored upon them to give all of their riches to the church, basically. But the church didn't give them, I want to be clear here, the church did not give them these wagons. It loaned them the money for it, using the Perpetual Immigration Fund, which they sent the interest rate at 10% per year. So Brigham Young, for these people we're talking about, so some of these guys came in, donated everything they had to the church, then the church sold them the green lumber to build the handcart, which they had built themselves, and then the church charged them interest year by year by year afterwards.
And it was effectively bad wood because it was green.
It was bad wood. And it caused them endless problems.
Did they know that they would have to do that before they got on the ship to come to America?
You know, the question keeps coming up when I talk to people about this stuff. They're always like, why didn't they just turn back? Well, a lot did. We'll talk about that in a second. But where would you go? You oftentimes the people who joined the church were destitute and poor already. That you had to be the type of person who would sell everything you have, pick up, and board a ship to the New World to head to some Zion in the middle of nowhere. That these were not people who had a lot of money in the bank, right? So the church was still asking for people to give things, and the church's tithing schemes changed from time to time. Like for a while, and this happened more than once, when you joined the church, you had to give 10% of everything you owned at that moment, and then you had to pay 10%. Yearly, and it was constantly shifting around. Okay, axles made of wood, and then they were not given. Now, on top of that, each person was allotted 17 pounds of goods. This is one of the first heartbreaks. You have these people who sold their homes, and they gathered up their prized possessions, from Scandinavia or from England, and they carried them across, or crossing the boat, riding the trains out, getting out to Iowa City. And then the church was like, yeah, you got to scrap all that stuff. And so you to these stories of these guys going and desperately trying to sell things that were worth money, but the market was saturated in Iowa City, so they'd get pennies for but they were trying to sell everything. 17 pounds of gear is not much. I implore you, dear reader or listener or whoever you are, put on a pair of pants, put on a shirt, put on your pair of shoes, put your winter coat on, grab your favorite blanket, and then stand on the scale. And you're going to be at about 17 pounds. They, unfortunately, were unloading a lot of bedding because they wouldn't let them bring it. So it was 17 pounds per adult and 10 pounds per child. That's everything. It's not like you could bring another 50 pounds of bacon. All the food was kept on the wagons. So they didn't really have any food in the handcarts. There were some exceptions when they threw it in there because they were getting bogged down. But the people didn't have their own food. All that was kept in common, if that makes sense. Okay. So the Willie Company arrives there on the 12th. They all came over on the same boats, and they spend the next 4 weeks trying to build these handcarts. Now, remember, in Iowa City, there had already been 3 companies who had done the same exercise in the weeks prior and who'd already hit the plains, as well as the regular wagon building and stuff that was going on. There were still full wagon trains going. In fact, there were 2 that left right after Martin Handcart Company, but for various reasons, they never caught up to the Martin and Willie Companies. They no longer appearing in this story. They take off, and there's going to be several disappearances in this whole story. Let's see. The Willie Handcart Company ended up being 500 people, 100 handcarts, and 5 wagons. Now, one of the things when you read Brigham Young's justification of the handcarts, and they still say this in the church, if you go get the old church manual, they'll say, well, the handcarts could move faster than the wagons, which is true. You could drive a team of oxen at about 3 miles an hour, which is a fast trot. If you're mall walking, you're walking about 3 miles an hour. But oftentimes the wagons would lumber on at about 1 mile an hour, which is why you hear when you read like the pioneers who are in the regular wagon trains, they would talk about like wandering off and go sitting in the field of flowers and coming back and that sort of stuff.
Because the wagons were so slow.
The wagons were so slow.
Yeah.
And so they touted this as being a quick thing, but they couldn't carry enough baggage to actually get across the plains with just their handcarts. So they had to have wagons. And these wagons were yoked with 6 oxen each. So five wagons, 6 oxen, the Willie Handcart Company. On July 30th, we're talking this time frame. This is very important. Brigham Young claims that he didn't know that the Willie and Martin Handcart Companies existed. He claimed he had no idea and he would have never sent a group across. However, there was a wagon train, I think in 52, that was sent across this late, and they got caught up in a winter storm. Now, they survived just fine because they had wagons, so they'd climb up in the wagons. So the church had actually screwed this one up before. Sent a late wagon train that got caught in winter storms in Wyoming and had to be rescued. Had already happened once. So let's keep a running toll of our dumbassery. Brigham Young talks as if it's 1,000 miles, but it's 1,300 miles. Brigham Young talks about them moving 15 miles a day, which would be a forced march by soldiers moving fast, right? And they never achieved that speed. Actually, the early companies achieved 13 miles an hour, which was not bad. But they never got anywhere close to what Brigham Young planned for. And Brigham Young, if they had done that, they would still been 300 miles short of Salt Lake City. It wouldn't have got them all the way there anyway. Okay. July 30th, Salt Lake City receives a letter from John Taylor that is frantically pointing out these guys are heading to Iowa City right now, and there's a whole bunch of them, and we're going to need to take care of them. Brigham Young claims he never saw the letter, but we have the letter, and it is stamped received Salt Lake City clerk's office. So that letter was actually received by Salt Lake City, even though they claim not knowing anything. Now, Brigham Young would do this again the next year with Mountain Meadows, claiming to know nothing. Brigham Young ruled the place with an iron hand, but he never knew anything that was going on. All right. So they take off and they take off we're talking about the Willie Handcart Company. They take off out of Iowa City and they arrive in Florence, winter quarters, 28 days later on August 11th. So we're kind of keeping track of the time. They arrived in Iowa City on the 12th. They had to build their own wagons, and then they head out to Florence, which is about 300 miles or so away. When they get there, their wagons are for shit. They have to spend a couple weeks just putting them back together and cobbling them together any way they can. They were falling apart. And Iowa, that territory was populated. So they could still trade with people all the way up until winter quarters. And they write about getting made fun of. People would mock them as they were running through town, which is unfortunate. So they get together. They arrive on 11th of August, and they get a conference together on August 13th. And this is key, and this is pivotal. They're talking about what should we do right now, guys. We're past the season. We got this long journey. Now remember, the companies were usually making it in 100 and 101, 110 days. That was the norm. So if you think about that being mid-August, you're talking about, 1 month would be mid-September, mid-October, mid-December. Best choice, best chance they were going to make it in January, February, if everything went right, right? Just out the door. But these guys wanted to believe, or were kind of bullying in their speaking. Our hero that we're going to run into a couple of times was Levi Savage, and Levi was an experienced man. He was part of the organization. So they're getting together, all the company leaders and what are talking, and Levi recorded in his journal this. I then related to the saints the hardships that we should have to endure. I said that we were liable to have to wade in snow up to our knees and should at night wrap ourselves in thin blankets and lie on the frozen ground without a bed. This was not like having a wagon that we could get into and wrap ourselves as much as we would like and lie down. They launched into him. And matter of fact, William Kimball, the son of Kimball, was traveling with
Heber C., son of Heber C.
Son of Heber C. Kimball. He was a general authority coming back from the mission, and he was with Richards, who's here now in this conference. So they're all there, and William says that he would stuff into his mouth all the snow they would ever get to see on their journey to the valley. As far as I know, William never did it, never suffered any repercussions for any of this stuff. Nobody did. They hung around for 3 more days. Savage offered to quit. He said, but his captain was smart enough to say, no, you stay on. And this noble man said, well, I'm going with you. I'm not going to send you out there alone. The same thing happened with the Martin Company. So they leave Florence on the 16th of August.
With a promise from a general authority that they're going to be fine.
With multiple promises by now, and the promises keep coming.
Yeah. It's kind of blind trust in your priesthood leadership.
Yeah, and
they actually have the power to see the future, and they're assuring you you're going to be safe.
They are, and they're doing it with rather intense rhetoric, like condemning people who have the audacity. And that attitude follows throughout. That you read the journals, it's really heartbreaking. They'll be like, Sister Smith, age 62, gave out on the plains. She was a grumbler and never had faith. I might say gave out. I mean, she died. So they oftentimes had attitudes that the people who died were the ones who deserved it because they were low in faith.
Yeah, it's the blame reversal again.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Gerardo was just asking, is this the story of 17 miracles? Is that the same as that LDS movie?
Probably, yes, it
Somebody
is.
else.
I've never seen 17 Miracles, but you got a lot of propaganda in there. So is it the same story? No, absolutely not. Is it the same story? Yes, it is.
We laugh so we don't cry. Yeah. Right. I was just highlighting a few comments on screen how this is quite whitewashed, not just for church history, but people's family history. They grow up on these stories, putting a lot of faith not only in the church, but, you want to be buoyed up by your ancestors, but it's just better to actually honor what actually happened to them than the church's whitewashed history that has been handed to you.
Absolutely. These are real people who really suffered in real sorts of ways. Okay. There was a conference on August 24th. This was to the Martin Company because the Willie Company had left on the 16th. And Richards...
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
So and this is going to reflect my lack of being able to fully follow you. If it's August, why is Levi Savage talking about walking in the snow when it's summer? What am I missing there?
Because they have to walk from
He's talking about what's going to happen.
Omaha all the way to Salt Lake City.
He's saying if
this
is dumb.
If we leave now,
we shouldn't leave now.
We shouldn't leave now. If we leave now, we're going to be walking through snow, and we don't have wagons. There's going to be no place for us to go, and we don't have enough. And they really didn't. As a matter of fact, there were some saints who they tried to cheat the system by wearing multiple layers of clothes. When they were discovered, they were beaten. We're going to talk a lot more about that more.
Yeah. So basically, Levi Savage was the truth teller, and the general authority said, "Shut up and know your place."
Yes,
we've got the prophecies,
and they're going to chase him down and tell him again before we're done here.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
But Levi stays with them the whole way. He he's important in the end, and
we won't give that away.
So August 24th, Richards. This is Franklin D. Richards. Now, just to be clear, he didn't die until 1899 in full fellowship of the church. He sired, his son became a member of the 12, and his grandson became a member of the 12. The Richards family, I don't know, let's see if we can name them. Marion D. That's Hanks. They were around, right?
Stephen Richards, I think.
Yeah, so they're a prominent family, at least 3 members of the 12. And he is the highest authority all these people have ever met. They've never met Brigham Young. They joined in Britain. So these are his people, right? So on August 24th, Richards gets up and says, "I prophesy in the name of Israel God through the storms, through the storms We may come from the east, the west, the north, or the south. God will keep the way open to the faithful at heart, and will arrive in the valleys in the safety and hopes that the saints will be blessed with health and strength to pursue until their journey's end, and there to meet with the Lord's anointed, be saved with the just and eternal world.
Okay.
So he prophesies again that they won't have anything come upon them. Remember, one general authority said he's going to eat everything, every bit of snow that comes up on these guys. And he says the way will stay open and you're going to be healthy. So the Martin Handcart Company leaves on August 24th.
With how many miles?
They have, at that point, they have a little over 1,000 miles to go.
And it starts snowing in like mid-September, probably.
It starts snowing on October 20th, about when you'd expect it
Okay,
to start.
never
Couple
mind.
months.
Yeah.
We got a couple months before the snow.
We got a long ways. The storms. It was a rough year, but the storms were not unheard of for Wyoming. It wasn't a freak
Right.
storm. It was a big storm, but it wasn't unexpected. You know, sometimes we talk about it like this thing. It was the buffetings of Satan. No, if you've ever been to Wyoming, you'll see there's these big gates, like because the blowing snow and storms are real up there, right?
Yeah, and they're predictable. They happen every year, pretty much.
Okay, let's talk about life on the trail a little bit. Generally speaking, the captains of the handcart companies would ride up and down the line with a cat o' nine tails or whatever they were, and they would whip people. It was either the second or the third one, they had the bright idea that the kids were causing them problems. So they took every kid under 8 and they herded them with switches like you would run sheep. So they would take the kids away from their parents and they would just whip those kids to keep them moving. It was an absolute forced march. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you fell, you got left behind.
It's like the Baton Death March kind
I
of
was about to say, I was like, this sounds like a concentration camp.
It was absolutely the Baton Death March. These guys, there was one story I was reading where the I think the man's wife was sick and laying. If they got really sick, they would lay him in the wagons, and they were stopped or whatever. And this man crawled up to like snuggle his wife or something, and the handcart company leader, I can't remember which one, just savagely beat him. These guys were absolutely violent. Two stories that stuck out to me. One, there was a 10-year-old boy in one of the companies, and this would be the early companies too. Like the Martin and a matter of fact, the Martin Company, Martin is thought to be the most gentle, most kind of all these drivers. The rest of them were dicks by a long shot. And they whipped people. In this one story, the boy was delusional and walking and fell in the ruts and passed out. And the company leader came and just started beating that kid with a switch until he woke up. And then one of my least favorite stories, there was a man who had rheumatoid arthritis, an old man, and he was they kicked him out of the wagon, and so he was holding. I'm sorry. He was holding onto the end of the wagon so he could walk. And the teamster saw him back there and took his whip and smacked him with it. And his wife wrote that was the last time he ever stood up. The man crawled behind the camp into camp where he died. Rheumatoid arthritis. These were people in their 60s, in their 70s. These were small children. These were pregnant women, and they were dying. And we're going to talk about why they were dying. When they planned the whole thing, the general the goal out the gate was they would have a ration, and that ration was 1 pound of flour a day. Most often it was 3/4 pound. Now, I unfortunately left my visual aid. 3/4 pound of flour is 12 ounces, which is basically 2 cups of flour. Now, this flour is not like ours. The calories in a cup of flour from the time, like if you grind whole wheat flour, is about 400. So let's give them a little bit of kicker. So the planned This is what was planned for the handcart companies, not out of desperation, not out of necessity, not out of need. The planned ration for everybody on these handcart companies was about 1,200 calories a day. If the skies had stayed sunny, the road had stayed clear. If the handcarts were not made of green wood with wooden chassis, there would have still been a large number of people who would have starved to death. The accounts of these saints as they were walking into Salt Lake match the accounts of Dachau. They were starved. They should have had 4,000 calories a day to do this march. And they were all starving to death. And they kept getting their rations cut, and their rations cut, and their rations cut.
You're talking about Holocaust. You're comparing this to the Holocaust.
Absolutely.
World War II.
Absolutely. That's the level of food that they had. Planned by the church, who had been running these wagon trains for 9 years. The church that had 17,000 people in the valley. They planned, first of all, for only 1,000 miles on a journey that was 1,300 miles. And they planned for them to starve. Now, their ration consisted of, they say, a little bit of sugar. In one of the pre-camps, they wrote it down in their journals. Our rations consisted of 10 ounces of flour. That's a little bit under 2 cups. Right now, keep in mind that's without like baking soda or baking powder or oil or
eggs
or any of that stuff, right? He said, besides our flour, we occasionally had a little rice, sugar, coffee, and bacon. But these items, especially the last, were so small and infrequent they scarcely observed mentioning. And unfortunately, even though when the Willie Handcart Company left, they had 40 head of cattle. And by the way, on Wikipedia, it says that they were raided by Indians. They were never raided by Indians. No Indians ever took their cattle. They wouldn't eat their cattle until the cattle either died or were about to die. But you can imagine if you divided a single cow, especially if it's a heifer, it's not really a big, huge meat steer, amongst 500 people, you're getting nothing. You're getting 200 calories.
It's underfed too, and
it's underfed. It's dying. That's why they were eating them, right?
Yeah.
We don't know what was in the minds of the church leadership. They didn't do this with the previous companies. They didn't do it with the companies that came after. Why they decided to starve these guys to death, I will never know. And I contend that the majority of death and pain and suffering that came because of this decision to starve these guys to death. And it was a decision to save money because you needed wagons. But Brigham Young needed mansions. I'll remind you that the second house that he built, the Lion House I referred to, had 27 bedrooms in it. Brigham Young was building an opulent structure out there. And these people were left to starve to death on the plains. It is a crime of crimes. It is a tragedy of tragedies. There is no excuse for it. And we're just getting going. All right.
Can I ask, I always kind of heard that the difference between the first pioneer treks, that like Brigham Young and the first saints, were people who had grown up on the frontier in the plains versus more like city folk Europeans who didn't know how to cross the plains. They were not used to living that type of lifestyle. And that's another reason that they were just kind of also set up for failure. They didn't know how to even begin to cross the plains.
That sounds like an apologist argument. The forward party, the first 148 or 152 or whatever they were, they were all experienced like pioneers. They were teamsters and people who knew what they were doing. You know, they took the best of the best to forge the trail. The companies were never just sent. They always had company commander, and they had people who knew. You know, you couldn't take somebody who was just, I don't know, a shoesmith or whatever in Manchester, and then give them a team of 6 oxen and expect them to do anything in the middle of Wyoming.
So they had leaders that were experienced.
Right.
Okay.
And the leaders on these handcart companies were experienced too. They weren't experienced with handcarts. And that's probably one of the reasons they got so violent with the folks. They knew they were falling behind. They were there too. Mm-hmm. They were watching the sun get darker, and they knew what was coming. They knew what was on the plains. Some of them exercised blind faith. Matter of fact, we have one of them who got up in conference afterward and told. In fact, after the first two companies got into Salt Lake, I think they took 110 days or so to do it. They got up in conference and reported that it took 63 days and 62 days. So these guys were lying for the Lord in ways that were really harming people. They were covering up the true story of what was actually happening.
Wow.
Okay. Let's see. So
Rations.
we were talking about rations. Yeah. Richards leaves Florence with the general authorities on September 4th, but they are in fast wagons. They're in buggies. They're running hard. They're running light. And so they're going to catch up with the Willie Company in about 2 weeks. A tragedy, and I'm not exactly sure what day it happened. It happened to the Willie Company sometime before Richards and folks show up to the Willie Company. During the night, a stampede of bison actually came near or through the camp. And in the morning, they had lost 30 of their 40 cows. And they searched and looked all, and they couldn't find them. The bison took them. So they were only left with 10 cows. Now, they did have milk cows that they took along with them. And so they lost, from what I read, they lost all their milk cows. So they didn't have that supplement anymore for food. So they were down to 10 cows. I have that written as September 4th as being the same day. At the North Bluff Fork of the Platte, we're about 320 miles west of Florence at this time, and Franklin D. Richards' party comes rolling into camp, into the Willie camp. And so they caught them on the September 12th. So the Willie camp's been they left the 16th. They've been about 4 weeks on the plains. And they're describing themselves at this stage as already people have lost their shoes. Their clothing is ragged. This is hard. I remember in one journal because they're still in the middle of the summer, and I think this is one of the earlier camps, but they had recorded a temperature of 108 degrees out there. And so they were toiling, through the heat. And if any of you have ever been to Nebraska or Wyoming, the wind never stops ever out there. It just keeps blowing. So the partying crew is Richards, William Kimball, Joseph Young, son of Brigham Young, and George Grant, son of Jedediah Grant. So these guys were all 70s and church authorities at the time. So Richard calls them into camp, and they have the worst conference ever. So the Willie Handcart Company is about 600 miles into this journey. They're already suffering. They've already had people die, in fact. Richards brings them up, and he says they would have power in God that neither Lamanite, nor heat, nor cold, nor any other thing would have power to seriously harm. And the camp, they should arrive with strong and healthy bodies in Zion. And then they get on and they berate Savage or whatever. But the next morning, they call him out again. And again, they pick on him for his lack of faith. And then they commit this unpardonable sin. They demand that the Willie Handcart Company find their fattest calf. And they have the company slaughter the calf. And they don't eat the calf. They take it with them. So let's pause here for a second. A prophet, seer, and revelator, one of the 12, was on the plains at the exact time of the Willie and Martin Handcart Company. In fact, he was in charge of the Willie and Martin Handcart Company. And at this stage, we're about 4 weeks before all hell breaks loose, well, with the weather. The only thing they can do is think to bring up this grudge against Levi Savage, who simply told them the truth, who simply told them it's going to be hot out there, it's going to be cold out there, the snow's going to come, and we won't have any place to go. So these assholes just take him up in front of the camp and berate him again.
By the way, he's the real prophet. He is actually prophesying and seeing and revealing what's about to happen.
Right.
Right. And the titled prophets, seers, and revelators are all false prophesying that everything's going to be peachy and rosy.
They not only false prophesy, they tell them that there will be provisions waiting for them in Fort Laramie. So they just need to get to Fort Laramie and they'll get resupplied. As they had resupplied the previous three companies had been resupplied in Fort Laramie, and then they'd been resupplied again after that. Okay? So it wasn't that much of a stretch of a promise for Richards to say, hey, you guys, who I'm taking your calf from you, you're gonna have a refilling station at Fort Laramie. John.
So wait, he takes the calf. And were you going to get to what they do with the calf in theory?
Well, I'm going to read you what John Chislett, who was there, said. Who he later left the church, as did most of these people. These brethren told Captain Willie they wanted some fresh meat, and he had our fattest calf killed for them. I am ashamed for humanity's sake they took it. While we, for 400 in number, traveling so slow and so far from home, without mixed company of men, women, children, aged sick, or with our mixed company of men, women, children, aged sick and infirm people, had no provisions to spare, had not enough for ourselves. In fact, those elders in Israel, this is his quotes, these servants of God, his quotes, took from us what we ourselves so greatly needed and went on in style with their splendid outfit, after preaching to us faith, patience, prayerfulness, and obedience to the priesthood. The Willie Handcart Company suffering immensely on the plains, starving to death, these wagons falling apart, the infirm dying on the side of the road, being left. And we have the burial records sometimes we have no records. Well, on one of the early ones, the guy who made all the coffins kept record, and that's how we know who died, because the church sure as hell didn't keep track. So these guys are there, and not only do they roll in and berate them for this thing that they're doing that is actually killing people, they take the little bit that they have. You want a metaphor for the church? There it is. This is a prophet, seer, and revelator, never defrocked. He went on for another 50 years. 1890, this guy died.
Richards.
1899.
Richards.
Franklin D. Richards.
Yeah.
He went on and he ordained people, and he did this. He took their cow and he ate it. Right? You want proof the church is not true? There it is. They did nothing to this man ever. He was honored his whole life. And he's going to make more mistakes. So what mistakes we already have him making? He ordered all the saints out. He had them build these wagons out of no good wood. When the people who knew what the fuck they were talking about would tell him, he would just insult and berate them.
Levi Savage.
Levi Savage, and there were a couple others, but Levi is key here, right?
And then he eats their cow.
And then he eats their cow.
To contribute to their struggles.
Meanwhile, they're in a big buggy, right? They have, I think I read they had all horses and mules. So that means they had expensive, oxen were cheaper than having a horse or trained mules. Mules were the best. You could move fastest and with that. And so they have this ultra lightning company, and they arrive in Salt Lake City on October 4th, I believe. October 4th.
They beat winter.
They did beat winter. But interestingly enough, they tell them that those guys are out there stuck on the plains. They knew. They never saw a snowflake. They knew what was coming. They knew what they had done. They couldn't see it and not understand it. There is no apologetics for this. It oftentimes, like Leonard Arrington, bless his heart, he just doesn't talk about it. That's how he deals with it.
You mentioned a 7% dropout rate.
Yes. So there are accounts of people just saying "fuck this" and turning around and going back. And every time they went to a fort, there were always people who didn't go forward. So they estimate that, again, we don't know, because oftentimes there weren't really good records. That between they say like 50 to 100 of each company or five, whatever, left and didn't go on. And again, most of the information we have is from the journals of people, and luckily they were preserved and they weren't destroyed, because they were around, and that was just the main story. But if you read this book, you can read a lot of the excerpts from the journals, and this wasn't so faith promoting for the individuals involved.
And the book you were referencing is the Devil's Gate book, right?
The Devil's Gate.
That's where your sources are mostly pulled from. People in the comments were just kind of curious.
Yeah.
So it's from that, and then I'm sure Roberts was his name? Something, Steve
Yes.
Roberts, something.
Yeah, and he quotes other folks there, so he has
David
a lot of
Roberts.
that
Okay.
material.
So if people are more interested in your sources, they can go to that book. And
They can, yes. I would suggest to do so. There are some apologetic sources too that discuss this, but they tend to focus in on little minor things. Like somebody who was deathly ill and then gets better and walks on, which does happen. I mean, the majority of people survived. It's like COVID. The majority of people are surviving, but that doesn't undermine the fact that there's 600,000 or more Americans who have died and millions of people worldwide. The people who died on the plains, they died on the plains. That was their experience. They got to winter quarters, they walked across the plains, and they starved to death, and they died. And that was how their life ended. So the fact that some people made it to Salt Lake is great. It's not that faith promoting to me.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
If a shooter walks into a school and kills 12 students and you weren't one of them, I don't want to hear about how your God blessed you. I don't want to hear that. And if that's what you believe, fuck you. I don't care. If you believe that your God is doing things like that for you and letting kids die of cancer and whatever, then take your God and run. We don't care. This is what the church did. The miracle that some people, and if you notice that the stories the church tells, the faith promoting ones, like the three young men who carried people across the river, that was them. This is the church jumping their story, right? Because I'm jumping ahead of myself just a tiny bit, but it was conference, right? As Richards got there, and on the 6th, they get up, and then Brigham Young gives his famous talk and says, "We've got people out there who are in trouble," and they did. They got their wagons together, but that wasn't the fucking church. That was the people. That was the people who'd crossed the plains. They threw together their blankets, they got together their food, they got together their wagons, they sacrificed their teams, and they took off on Monday. When they found out there was a problem on the 6th, they took off the next day. The church had sent 3 supply wagons before Richards got into Salt Lake. We know this because Richards talks about meeting them. Not one of the 3 ever made it to where they went. Where they to the Willie or Martin Handcart Company. Where they went, we have no idea because it was probably expunged from the church records. So the first supply train never went there. There was never any supplies sent to Fort Laramie. Even though they'd sent supplies for the first 3 handcart companies, they did not refuel Willie or Martin. I mean, these guys were just left to die. There were supposed to be supply trains that were coming later. It gets worse than that. So this is the church that's being led by God. So they have all of these guys who are heading out to resupply. So what the guy in charge named Grant does is he takes the first wagon and about 100 miles in, he says, dump your stuff here because this is where the company's going to go and head back. And then he takes the next one. He says, dump your stuff here. So by the time they actually get to Willie Company, there's a forward group that has hardly any provisions. And the first thing they do is they feed them. And then the Willie Company, God bless them, say, the Martin Company's behind us. So they take off out of camp and hightail it out there to get to them. But the church decision to not bring the provisions to the Willie and Martin Handcart Company. Let's go through this again. They didn't send them with enough food in the first place. They didn't send the supply chain to Fort Laramie. They didn't send the backup supply chains that they did with the other. The first rescue party was dismissed and sent to God knows where. The next rescue party was divided up and they left the provisions so those guys could go back home when what happened is those people needed the goods. So the Willie and Martin Handcart companies had to keep walking. And that was from sheer fucking incompetence on the part of the church. They could have run all that stuff out. And you know what? If God ever wants to give a revelation, it would be like, hey, you might want to take a couple more blankets with you. They might be a little bit in trouble out there. And we read over and over and over again, these people who, the saints sitting in that conference who jumped those wagons on October 7th, they knew. They knew. Where was God? Where was his leadership? Where was his prophet? His prophet was marrying another 14-year-old girl and living in his fucking mansion in Salt Lake City, right? Where they still are. They still sit on their $100 billion. There's still, those voices cry out from the plains, and they will. And their blood has not been served by the church's shenanigans that follow. But I digress. I'm sorry. I told you at the beginning, this pisses me off. It's just disgusting. It's beyond words. You know, the gross incompetence and the blame on the people. Ugh. All right.
In summation, it just sounds like you're saying that the church, this entire I think episode is kind of about the church setting people up for failure, and then when they are able to band together and help one another, that the church isn't pitching in to do with either resources or money. It's the people who are doing the right thing and helping one another and sacrificing, while the church leaders are taking their cows from them and still taking 10%, what's the word?
Extortion?
You said the 10% tithing, 10% when you give money and then they take back 10%. What's that word?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Interest. There we go.
Interest.
That the church is taking so much from them. But then the church today is now using the faith promoting stories that the church had nothing to do with the faith promoting stories in the first place. That was people.
Well, the church absolutely created the conflict.
The conflict that needed to be resolved, but
Yes.
they're taking credit for it today, where they'll print it in the ensign.
Correct.
And use this as a faith building testimony experience, while it's actually just people who are put in terrible contexts.
Yep. All right, so let's pick up. When Willie gets to Fort Laramie, he scrapes together what money he can, and he buys 400 pounds of basically soda crackers. They tally their provisions, and at that point, they had enough provisions for 18 days. The blizzard that the Willie Handcart Company pushes through was on their last day of food. They had used up all their food, and so they really hadn't. They really couldn't do anything. I would beg you to read in the book or in other sources the accounts of the people starving to death. They talk about just like you've heard everything else. They ate their shoes. They ate the leather. They cut the leather off of the handcarts. The leather that it was shod on the wheel, and they ate it. You can imagine how hungry you'd have to be. The one guy in one journal I read, the man said he contemplated eating nails. They were starving. That was not due to the snow. That was due to planning. The church planned for them to starve to death. All right. I'm sorry I keep yelling at you guys. You guys don't deserve it. Sorry out there. I love you. I'm not yelling at you. Okay, so Franklin D. Richards shows up at the conference, October 6th, which we already referenced, and this is what he says. The saints that are now upon the plains, about 1,000 with handcarts, feel it is late in the season, and they expect to get cold fingers and toes, but they have this faith and confidence towards God that he will overrule the storms, that they may have the season thereof and turn them away, and their path may be free from suffering more than they can bear. They have confidence to believe that this will be an open fall. About sometime after
and what's
this,
he saying? What's he basically saying there?
he's saying that there'll be an open fall. That he says that they'll have cold toes and fingers. He's minimizing. Oh, they're going to get a little bit. They're going to get a little bit chilly, but they're going to be strong and they're going to be healthy. He keeps insisting this. He has no choice but to insist this because he's the architect of this. He and Brigham Young, of course.
It's confirmation bias, basically.
It's worse.
Yeah.
I mean, this man is as terrible as they come, right? Sometime after Fort Laramie, Willie actually receives a letter saying that there'd be a resupply train in South Pass. Somebody kicked off a letter to him. There was never a supply train in South Pass. There was never any indication that anybody had sent a supply train to South Pass. There was never anything done. October 19th, Willie Handcart Company sets out 1 day's provision left. They head straight into a blizzard, 1 foot of snow. 20th is when they hunker down. October 20th, both the companies come to a complete stop. Now, we've talked mostly about the Willie Company. I want to point out a couple things about the Martin Handcart Company. They should be faith promoting.
Wait, when did the Willie Company arrive in Salt Lake?
Later. I didn't write that down.
Okay.
The
Weeks, months?
It's QED after this.
Before December?
So the Forward Company arrives on October 25th to the Willie Company, and they press through, and they get to the Martin Company a couple days later. These guys start moving things forward with wagons, and they start trying to unscrew up where they had cached the goods, because they get out there and these people are immediately in need of bedding, of coats, of food, of boots, of everything. Multiple journals describe them as being nearly naked. And by the way, when we talk about deaths, there are a lot of deaths that occur later in Salt Lake City, even for years. And some of these people suffered just immensely.
And Google says that Willie Company arrived November 9th to Salt Lake.
Okay.
And that Martin Company arrived November 30th.
Thank you.
With, well, like you said, probably almost no clothes.
Right.
Like,
Well, at this point, they were brought in on wagons because they
had to go
were
rescue?
The rescue brought them into town.
Okay.
Does it say how many total deaths? Maybe you're going to talk about that.
There are the numbers.
At
The
least
church
estimates.
they're all just lies, and most of the deaths came from the 5 companies, and especially the 2. But
I guess I should say known deaths.
known deaths.
Yeah.
And let me just highlight George's comment really quick that says, I'm a descendant of Jackson in the Martin Handcart Company. I'm seeing this on a whole new light. John Larsen is mirroring my emotions.
Okay, so the question has been risen by people who don't pay attention. Why did more men die than women? Well, the men had another unfortunate thing we talk about. They had to pull night watch every other night. So in addition to having 1,000 calories or less a day and walking 15 miles in the heat and in the cold, they were sleep deprived. There should be a faith promoting story in the Martin Handcart Company. 3/4 of the Martin Handcart Company were women. Of course, the church doesn't emphasize this point, even though it could be faith promoting. Look at all these women, because it breaks their narrative. When we think about people pushing carts, you have this man up there with a little kid eating a lollipop on top, with his son next to him, and there's another guy who's in the back pushing, and then maybe you have a cartoon angel like helping push. We don't like the idea of 2 15-year-old girls who are barefoot, bleeding, suffering from frostbite, just doing the thing till they collapsed. And they did collapse. Even though I told you they didn't pick up, both the Martin and Willie Handcart Company people would get into camp and then they would immediately turn around the strongest and just go back and pick up people and throw them into the carts. That's not the storm that we celebrate at Martin's Cove. That's before the storm. That's the real tragedy of Martin's Cove, is we focus on this little event, but they were already just emancipated at that point. So I took a little list of the known fuck ups. There weren't enough rations. The handcarts weren't well constructed and were falling apart.
Greenwood.
They made the axle out of wood. The axles were breaking constantly. They knew the trail was 300 miles longer than they advertised. They knew 15 miles a day couldn't be done. It never had been done and never would be done. They didn't send the big resupply wagons like they did with the first 3. They didn't send the supply wagon to South Pass like they promised. They diverted the 3 early supply wagons that came. They cached the stuff with the others. They knew that 17 pounds of material was not enough to keep people warm in the winter. And everything they planned and everything they prophesied was wrong.
And they took their cow. The people died because they took their cow. Yeah, and they nurtured a a mindset of blind faith and obedience, this naive, precious faith and confidence in prophetic leadership that was what enabled the people to blindly follow them into disaster. Mm-hmm. And they silenced and punished any of the naysayers.
Right.
That sounds familiar.
Well, one of my favorite stories is I think Will Bagley estimates that as half the saints who came to Salt Lake went back. There was a party in the spring of 300, mostly people from this company and others, that left Salt Lake in April, armed to the teeth. They didn't want the Danites to come murder them, which is pretty good evidence that there's at least one wagon train that had left that were murdered by the Danites, because Hickman said he did.
If anyone doesn't know what the Danites are, can you give like a tiny spiel?
The Danites were Brigham Young's bodyguards and assassins, basically. When in Nauvoo, it basically started with the whistling elders, which is a story they used to tell in Sunday school manuals. Well, the whistling deacons, because we envisioned deacons as 12-year-old boys, and the whittling and whistle. What they would do is they would stand on the street corner, whittling with their big Bowie knives. These weren't children; these were grown men. And then when the people of the William Laws group, the dissidents of the church, would come by, they would whistle and signal to each other. Very menacing, very threatening. So Brigham Young took that group that Joseph Smith kind of started. We're talking about Porter Rockwell, Wild Bill Hickman, those guys, and they, by their own accounts, they became assassins. So when Brigham Young would have problems with different people around the valley, they would send these guys to kill him. I can't, that's the easiest way to put it, and to terrorize and they also stole horses from the Paiutes and stuff like that. Just your regular bad guy shenanigans. Brigham Young was not a good person at all, even in a little bit. Like he was as bad as they come. Okay, let's talk about today. In the classic, the Joseph Heller book, Catch-22, there is an element. This is about bomber squadrons who keep getting sent in to bomb Germany, even though they're getting killed. And this is a true story. At first they had to do 15 missions, and then they didn't have to do any more. And then they made it 25, and then they made it 50, and then they made it 100. And these guys had to keep getting on these bombers and flying into the flak when they knew the survival rate, the shoot down rate after like 15 missions was up basically 100%. So our hero, a guy named Yossarian in the book, is flying point. He's at the front, and they start getting flak, and there's weather, and it's wet. So he turns the whole squadron around. He wasn't supposed to do that. They're supposed to just hold the line and run the bombing run, and die is what their orders were. So he turns around. So the generals get together, and they're like, "What are we going to do with this guy?" And they say, "We either have to court-martial him, or we have to give him a medal. But we can't afford to lose we can't afford to lose a pilot. So they give him a medal." So the aftermath of this was written about widely, and the people who had been on this trip, most of them, they didn't find this faith promoting at all. And there were plenty of people who thought this was just horseshit, this whole trip, and especially with the handcarts. Again, the armed group of 300 who left Salt Lake City and turned around or went on to California, whatever they did. So the church has a problem now. Because like I say, there is nothing faith promoting about this story at all. It was done through sheer either incompetence or maliciousness. Those are the only two possible explanations. And the incompetent one doesn't hold water. The malicious one is hard to believe. It's hard for me to believe. But there seems to be very other explanations for what happened. We can see in some talks that the lack of faith that you should be able to cross the plains and not ask the church for food. There's plenty of you out there who've seen this before, giving hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to church, losing your job and having the bishop berate you for trying to get some food out of that story is so common. I mean, and it dates way back. So what do you do with the gross incompetence and tragedy of the Willie and Martin Handcart Company? You celebrate it. If you want to know how propaganda works, there it is. You, my friends, have been subjected to it. Probably, if you haven't read up until now, for most of you, this is the first negative thing you've ever heard about the Willie and Martin Handcart Company, let alone the rest of them, because we don't speak ill of the dead. Why would we say anything negative about those guys? So the church just celebrates it. Give them all medals, right? There's no reason any of those people had to die, let alone die in the horrific, terrible ways they died. One of the women talks about her husband dying early in the night, and she screamed out and called for help, but there was no help. She laid next to her dead husband for 9 hours. That didn't have to happen. This does not promote faith at all. This does not suggest that there was anything happening that was good or praiseworthy. This suggests greed and avarice and raw grabs for power, right?
Yeah, the lessons here are don't trust the brethren, don't follow the brethren, don't follow blindly, don't believe their revelations, don't trust the people that they denounce or criticize because they're probably the truth tellers, and they're kind of greedy, amassing wealth, and they really don't care about the members, even to the point of the members dying with pain and suffering. They don't care. Collateral damage is just part of the deal. That's those are the lessons of this experience.
They use it.
Yeah.
They would send the youth out there, and they wouldn't tell them what was really going on. I mean, I would love them to send the youth out there with a 5-pound bag of flour and say, that's what you got, whatever else you can find.
Right. Yeah. You're saying Draper Pioneer Trek, in 2021 isn't anything. It's almost a mockery, right?
It's a mockery. The tents, they slept 20 people in those tents, just cheek to jowl, right? They were just right in there. And one of the accounts, this girl, I think she was 16, she expressed with shame her brother had died in the night, and they'd come around the next day and were passing out rations. And for a second, the guy passing out forgot that her brother was dead and gave them the ration, and then he remembered and said, oh, he died, so he took it back. And she writes in her journal how ashamed she felt because all she could feel at that moment was that she wanted that ration. I don't know if the church still does this. I implore anybody, please do not go out there with anything but reverence for the people who died. And please don't play the church's game. It's sick that the church sends kids out there to do what they do, these things. It's sick.
You're talking about youth treks. For the non-Mormons.
I'm talking about the treks. Yes, please.
For non-Mormons who don't know what John's talking about, it's now common across Mormon youth groups all throughout the United States for every 4 years or so for a trek to be planned, which I don't know is like a week-long kind of activity where a bunch of suburb white Mormon youth who are largely affluent go to somewhere in Wyoming, and there's a bunch of wagons and there's a bunch of hand carts and there's adult supervision and tents and rations and food, and they basically try and recreate a small part of this journey that you're talking about.
I would push back on the word recreate. I don't think there's anything in that about recreation.
Right. Remember when Kelly Tress was on and she grew up in Sandy? I didn't. I purposely didn't go. I'm smart. But do you remember when Kelly Tress was on and she said she grew up in that really affluent neighborhood in Sandy and that Trek was catered by Cafe Rio? And that's where I think a lot of the frustration John's feeling is that it is a spitting in their face to act like you're doing anything close to this recreation that they went on.
The church pushed these people into this terrible nightmarish situation. If someone were to make an accurate movie about what happened, when you read about the horrific deaths people were going through, I was reading one of the guys, he had a wooden leg, and just the sheer agony they would talk about of every day him taking off that leg. This is a horror movie on par with the worst horror movies you've seen. Like, it was really,
it's like recreating the Holocaust, right? It's a Mormon version of
They
the
beat
Holocaust.
children. They beat everybody with whips, with sticks. They punished people for getting sick. They forced the elderly, sick elderly, to just walk. They left them to die on the plains. They underfed. And you read the humanity story. He talks in the book, if you want to read, about the problem they were having with theft. And just imagine yourself as a father or mother of children. You're just watching them starve to death.
Yeah.
And so this terrible thing that led to Martin's Cove, that the church has taken that to serve itself.
Instead of owning up to it, atoning for it,
Right.
apologizing for it, trying to do some type of restitution. Again, all of the steps of repentance that they impose upon us, that's what should have done the reparations to their families and the descendants, apologies. Instead of that, go ahead.
Oh yeah, or markers honoring the dead. I mean, the 17 miracles, which I have to say I've never seen, but okay, were there 17 miraculous sort of things? Sure. I mean, I don't believe they're miracles, but people get sick and get better. What do they say? 1 out of every 20 cases of cancer spontaneously goes into remission. So you're going to have some faith-promoting stories, just statistically. That's
Just like you say, courageous humans that did courageous things.
Courageous humans doing courageous things.
Right.
But those 17 miracle stories are ignoring the 300, 400, 500, 600 stories of people who died horrific deaths and suffered horrific deaths. Want to have their children die in their arms, their spouses, just to sit and be a young woman who has 5 children and watch her husband die on the plains, pursuing this miracle of Zion. And when they got there, they were fed, they were taken care of, and the least thing. But these people were oftentimes saddled with debts, sent out to other podunk places. It was a hard life. And talking to my dear wife about this, she's like, "Why didn't they leave?" And my answer is always, "And go where?" You're from Manchester. Here you are on the high plains of Wyoming with nothing. Where do you go? What do you do? These people had no choice. To keep walking every day is not a matter of faith. It's a matter of what else can you possibly do? And I think the church is, I can't overemphasize enough, is disgusting for trying to profiteer off this thing,
right,
by using it as a faith promoting story for getting the youth in the church.
And to get more tithing.
And to get more tithing.
Yeah.
And I've been out to Martin's Cove once. I don't remember a lot, but it was a lot of faith promoting stuff. I made the same complaint about the Mountain Meadows massacre site. If you go onto the church site, and I think somebody said they fixed this a little bit, but it used to be, there was a big monument, and if you read the plaque, it talked about how Gordon B. Hinckley made this monument in 1990. It was a monument to a monument. You had to go, if you go up to a bluff, that land is not owned by the church, and that's where it has the names of every person who died. That's where it has the story of what actually happened at Mountain Meadows. Same thing with Willie and Martin. It's complete lies. It's complete fabrication. It is there just to trick you emotionally. The church had no place to bury this story. It was an abject and utter failure that absolutely demonstrates that Brigham Young and Franklin D. Richards were uninspired and, in fact, probably the worst. So what they did is they put it right in plain sight.
Yeah.
And we, including myself, were all taken in.
So every July 24th in Utah, there's Pioneer Day, where Utah Mormons all take off their jobs and their school, and they all get in the streets and make handcarts, and they march down the streets to celebrate pioneers, which really is celebrating the church.
Celebrating the pioneers would be a noble thing to do. There were great sacrifices. A whole bunch of my ancestors came across on the plains.
Mine too.
And they made sacrifices and that sort of stuff. And I don't want to denigrate the sacrifices they made. I'm saying that for the handcart companies, they made sacrifices they didn't have to. Yeah. And they were built in. They were planned. They would have starved to death anyway.
for me, so I'll just, so we can take this story and go, wow, 150 years ago, the church did a really bad thing, right? That's one way to kind of that's one conclusion to draw from this story. For me, it gets a little bit more serious, and I observe that this type of callous profiteering behavior has continued. And I'll just tell you, in my lifetime, so it's 2000, I'm working at Microsoft, and I learned about this guy named Stuart Mattis. He's this young gay Mormon returned missionary who goes up to his California ward or stake building, pins a note to his chest that says, "Do not resuscitate," and he shoots himself on the steps of the church building. Now, this is on the heels of Prop 22. This is 8 years. This is on the heels of Prop 22.
Before Prop 8.
Before Prop 8. This is 8 years before Prop 8. And I may get the years tiny bit wrong. Mm-hmm. But how many decades, whether it's the electroshock therapy at BYU in the 70s or whatever, for how many decades up until this point had LGBT Mormons been dying by suicide? We don't know. But we do know that, kind of like with Stuart Mattis in 2000, whoa, that's a wake-up call. And I learned, if I know about this living in, Issaquah, Washington, working for Microsoft, the brethren know about the story, right? Mm-hmm. Fast forward another 8 years, the brethren start Prop 8. And we see deaths by suicide in Utah just spike. You literally look at suicides prior to 2008, and then you see this hockey stick of an inflection at 2008, where youth and young adult suicides just double and triple the national average. And by 2008, 2009, there's even a Deseret News article about, wow, for some reason our youth suicides are just super high. We don't totally understand why, and I'm like, whoa, this is serious. And then you just see from 2008 to now, you've got this steady stream of deaths by suicide that are 2 to 3 times the national average. Now, there are other factors at play, the accessibility of handguns being one of them, because Colorado and Idaho and Wyoming all have higher accessibility to guns maybe than the national average, but they've also got a lot of Mormons. And what I have just kind of and I remember meeting with Elder Holland, and I'm like, Elder Holland, it's not just the LGBT deaths by suicide. How many Mormon marriages have been dissolved when somebody just stumbles on factual church history? Elder Holland, you're losing thousands and thousands of families every year are being dissolved, right? You've got 12 and 13-year-old kids struggling with scrupulosity, deep anxiety or depression, and sometimes suicidality because of the guilt and shame around masturbation, right? You've got this epidemic of problems that the church has known about for decades across all sorts of different measures. What has the church done? What has the church done about the LGBT crisis? Only after they were beaten into submission by movies like, Believer by Dan Reynolds and HBO, by Tyler Glenn, venting his spleen on the global stage to try and call attention to the deaths and the carnage. And even in 2021, you still see the church doing the same thing it did 150 years ago, mm-hmm. Just kind of yeah. And the members too, the members join in. It's just this mass indifference and callousness to deaths and to the dissolution of families, to the destruction of marriages, and to the, mass defection of members from the church records. And what's the church's response? It's send more money to Ensign Peak. First it's 100 billion, now it's 120 billion, now it's 150 billion, and let's build more temples. Oh, let's announce another 20 or 25 temples this general conference. It's just like Brigham Young building more rooms to his mansion, Nero fiddling while Rome burns. The brethren are raking in the dough, and the carnage continues. The indifference, the callous indifference and profiteering continues. Am I wrong?
Suppose there was an institution that was a church that selected its leadership based on business acumen and loyalty to the institution. Suppose this thing existed.
Okay.
It would look exactly like the church looks today.
Yeah.
That's the epiphany that a lot of people have when they're struggling with the church is true. It's the realization that the church looks exactly how it would look if it were not true. When I say not true, it's of course by their own definition. These guys, I mean, you listen to conference, they don't even know what they're talking about anymore.
They're like, go to church more, go to the temple more. Like that's going to solve the societal ills of today.
Right.
Pay more tithing, like they need it. Right.
Right. Well, they don't know. They have no inspiration. They don't know what else to do. Like they're institutional men. It's like Facebook or Amazon. They just keep getting more money and more money and more money. They don't know what to do with it. Now we'll go be billionaire space cowboys. It's the church is another billionaire space cowboy. They're not going to give any of it back. But they don't know what to do with it. That's
but
why
they keep asking for more. That's the thing. They keep asking for more. They steal the cow and they eat it and they ask for more.
Right. I think they've announced something like 200 and something temples, and 100 of them haven't even been built at all. Like there's this huge backlog. It's like a game they're playing now. They just announced all these temples and they may or may not be built. There's places that they announced years ago that there's no sign there's any temple coming, And what does it even mean?
Because they're not going to say the church is growing in leaps and bounds because it's shrinking to a halt.
Except
so what are they going to announce?
It's growing the way they want it to. Because they're the criteria they use to select general authorities.
Yeah, it's like, are you my son-in-law, basically?
Well, there's that.
Are you wealthy? Are you an attorney?
Are you connected?
But also, can you fix big problems without them leaking out into the press?
Are you an institutional person?
These are fixers. General authorities are the people that have been determined to be loyal. Corporate fixers who have been determined to be loyal, who know how to fix stuff to minimize the embarrassment, in the press.
You, dear listener, probably know more about the church than they do, for sure.
Oh, I didn't even mention the mass epidemic of sexual abuse of children, of young men, of young women. We have
they
had
knew about
the Boy Scout.
They knew what was
Scout
going on in the Boy
scandals.
Scouts. Everybody knew what was going on in the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, we just got news that 80,000 former Boy Scouts have now complained and joined on to these class action lawsuits. It's got to be at least 20,000 of them that were Mormon. And the church has known about these abuses forever. And Kurt McConkie just pays off the victims, silences them, and continued investing in the Boy Scouts until the class action lawsuits got so bad they had to shut it down. And even then, they didn't say, oops, we had too much abuse, we're shutting down the Boy Scouts. They're like, we need to expand our programs into international realms, and we need to include the women. So instead of just like with the story you just told, instead of owning the carnage that was self-inflicted and even planned, they turn it into a positive spin and say, we love our international brethren and sistren, and we now love our women, so we have to get rid of the Boy Scouts because we love girls and we love our international members. And that's how they spin the carnage that is over 20,000 cases of sexual abuse. Mormons, sexually abused by Mormons, supported and covered up by bishops and state presidents.
This lawsuit is only people who were sexually abused by like scoutmasters and others in authority. The real epidemic of the Boy Scouts was youth on youth sexual abuse and violence. Meaning, I'm not trying to undermine the fact that if you get abused by a leader, that is enormous. But the reason I say this other one was bigger. Like,
sure.
Like the number of the number of people who can tell you stories about being abused by scoutmasters is paltry compared to the number who talk about sexual shaming and humiliation and all those things that were done to them in the Boy Scouts.
But also, yes, that, and if 1 out of every 100 cases of sexual abuse is actually reported, is that number, 100,000? Is it 500,000? Like, we don't know how massive the sexual abuse has been in the church. And I'm just saying that all of that.
And in part because Kurt and McConkie would swoop in and NDAs.
Buy off people, silence them.
People. Yeah. Hey, if you don't have any morals, I got a $30,000 scheme for you. All you have to do is accuse a church leader that they wiggled your diggle, and the Curtin McConkie will zoom out and give you $30,000 to shut up.
Yeah. And so I asked myself, how do we live in a world where all of this pain and suffering and carnage is acceptable and there's not moral outrage? And the truth is, the church has been doing this for 200 years. And this is the culture. This is our culture.
They know how to clean up the messes.
Yeah.
Right?
And to get richer and richer. I mean, this sounds really angry. Carah, you're probably feeling like we're unhinged.
No, I'm thinking in metaphors. You want to hear my metaphor?
Yeah, what's your metaphor, Carah?
My metaphor is like human beings, we come from evolution, and just I'm thinking about like dinosaurs right now, and the way like in Jurassic Park that like if you make too much motion, they can snap, like the T-Rex can go and snap you, right? And eat you. So the members are like a T-Rex and they're looking for motion. And if the church, it can make motions, it can get rid of Boy Scouts, it can allow like Black people to go into the temple. But if it makes too much motion, they know they're going to be snapped up by the church. The members are going to start like actually looking out what's going on. We're just like evolved like little reptilian brains who, if the church knows it makes too much noise or too much motion, people are going to get angry and start asking questions. But they can do these things. They can obfuscate. They can say the different reasons why they're doing them. They can do it only when pushed. So that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to make too much noise. That we're not really prophets.
And also, I mean, Levi Hancock, right? Levi
Savage.
Levi Savage. Perfect metaphor for, Eugene England, Lowell Benyon, Leonard Arrington, Paul Toscano, Margaret Toscano, Jeremy Runnels, Bill Reel. Pick your public vocal dissident. The church for over 150 years has been silencing and shaming and humiliating its critics.
And lying.
And giving false prophecies. Like, it is, this story that you brought to us, John Larsen, is a perfect type and a shadow and metaphor that explains the corporate church of the corporation of the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its inexplicable behavior for 200 years. Mm-hmm. This is the perfect metaphor that you brought to us today. Well, it explains it all.
That question, don't you guys have anything better to do with your time? The answer is no, because the story of these people, the real people, and their real experience deserves not to be lost and forgotten, deserves not to be turned into a propaganda item by the church, as it has. They dishonor the dead, people who sacrificed everything to the last measure, to use the church's terms. And what have we done? We've erased them, and it's shameful. And their story needs to be told. It deserves to be told. It's a part of the American experience. And it's a part of what built Utah, which was hard work and tenacity and grit and avarice and violence and corruption. And when we realize that we're all bathing in that stuff, that I love the United States. We've done some great things. It's a wonderful country. And we've done some terrible things. And if we can't recognize that we have benefited from slavery, that we have benefited from the mass genocide of the indigenous people, that we've benefited from immigrants that we chewed up and used up to build our empires. Our empires are not worth anything. It's garbage. And the church, well, the church is not redeemable. Like it never will. It can't. It doesn't know how. It doesn't know how to not lie. And the problem is that the members have been trained to not be able to detect a lie from the church. And it takes a lot of this sort of undoing to do that. You think I choose to read this book?
Yeah, it's not fun.
These stories do not, you saw my book every year. I'm here with my friend Brent, and he was joking beforehand that.
You mean Bruce, right? Just kidding.
That he kept seeing my book laying around as I've been reading it the last couple of weeks. And it's like, because I have to put it down. I have to walk away and go, it's terrible, Yeah. And what's be the first reaction from the faithful people? They won't read it. They won't look at it. They'll say, "Oh, John, he said shit. I don't have to read that book." But like I said in previous podcasts, what happened out there is way worse than anything I can bring to you. I'm sorry. This isn't fun stuff.
and the pain and the carnage continues. That's the whole point. Again, if this is just 150 years ago, yeah, that's hard. Let's learn from it. The carnage continues to this day, whether it's sexual abuse of children, sexual abuse of teenage girls and teenage boys, marriages being destroyed, lives being destroyed, LGBT deaths by suicide. The carnage continues. People being ostracized from their family just for losing their faith, people being excommunicated for speaking the truth about the church. The carnage continues while the church gets not just super wealthy, it's becoming $1 trillion church.
So you have to ask yourself, are they incompetent or are they evil?
Yeah. And it's, we always like to say, Carah, systems, not people, right?
Right.
Like, I was thinking about the obedience to authority experiment by Stanley Milgram. Mm-hmm. It's one of the most famous psychological experiments of all time, where they have these Confederates in white lab coats standing over the subjects of the study, telling them administer a lethal voltage to somebody over the wall that they can't see, who's shouting as the lethal dosage of electricity is being administered. 2/3 of the participants administered lethal levels of shock as far as they knew, just because some white dude in a lab jacket with the clipboard was saying, you must complete the experiment. You must complete the experiment. We are wired to obey authority. And the hardest part about this, John, is that these leaders, maybe even this Richards guy, but the leaders today, they're obeying authority. They're kind of all obeying Joseph Smith's authority, even though he's long dead. And so in some sense, we can direct our anger at the church leaders, including the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12, but they're victims too. I know it kills the buzz a little bit to sort of say it's the system more than the people, but there's kind of some truth to that, right?
Today, if you try to argue either Brigham Young or Joseph Smith was a victim, I won't, not on any level.
No, I'm talking about today.
Today, yeah, they were part of a system, but they also are in a position where they can see and they can fix it.
Yeah, they can fix it.
So they get a moral pass up to a point, and then they don't get one anymore.
Well, they can't fix it and keep raking in tens of billions of dollars a year in tithing.
Right.
And and without hemorrhaging the membership even more. And that's the thing. We did an episode on Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow and the prepper movement, because that stuff comes right out of the prepper movement. Mm-hmm. The church could stop the prepper movement, but it would lose a huge percentage of its members in the process.
I would say the church could have stopped the prepper movement. I think they lost control during COVID. And if you read the pages of the Deseret News, you'll see it. They're trying to steer the Utah is a MAGA state, and they're trying to steer it back to the Romney, neoconservatives. They like the rich, the Republicans get us rich, but they're struggling, and it's their own damn fault.
Yeah,
and it's going to get worse here before it gets better. Yeah. And the church is going to have to. They don't have any. Who in the quorum is somebody who can make change?
Yeah, no one can. I've talked to Holland. I talked to him. He's like, I'm just one guy. I'm just one of 15 guys. And at the time, he was a junior apostle. And by the time you make it to being a senior apostle, you're two in.
You have to say.
It's true.
You walk around telling people you're a fucking wizard. Don't tell me that you're.
No, I know, but he in private he will say, I'm just one of 15.
Yeah,
and
one
I'm a
of
junior
15
apostle
people who says they're special witnesses for Jesus Christ.
I know.
You are not just one of 15. You should have an immense amount of wizardry.
Yes, not one of those assholes has seen Jesus Christ, and they will all.
They're admitting that these days.
They will all just nurture that one out there. Well, kind of. I want one of them to get up and say, I want you to know that as a man standing before you now, I have never laid eyes on. They don't say that. You know?
I mean, they do in the Smoot hearing. You know what I'm saying? In the Smoot hearing, they'll say
yes, right? Yes, they will in the Smoot.
They'll admit in the Smoot hearing they never saw Jesus. But in front of the members, it's, I know in ways that I can't even describe that I, believe and know that this is true.
And can I just say one thing? That
Are we on a rant now? Are we ranting?
No.
Are we ranting, John?
You're ranting. I'm getting started.
Okay.
Let me join. The first shelf item generally for me when I was Mormon was that I wasn't being edified in a lot of ways, and I felt like I like talking about Jesus. I got a lot of spiritual connection with a higher power when I thought about Jesus Christ and the atonement, and I just focused on a lot of that. And that I survived Mormonism for 7 years, just kind of being a little bit of a mini Jesus freak with one foot in like an evangelical Christian camp and one foot in Mormonism. And my first big problem was like the things we're talking about, how the church will enrich itself. And I'm like, the Jesus Christ that I worship, that I technically put above these men that they're supposed to be special witnesses of, it's not the same Jesus Christ. They're worshiping one that is thinking about their own houses, building their own wealth, and that the Jesus I worship is like, if you want to be my disciple, foxes have holes, birds have nests, and the Son of God, I don't have anywhere to rest my head, and sell everything and follow me and just be like this sacrificial, like the opposite of the Joel Osteens of the world who were like, God wants you to be rich. That's not the Jesus. And I couldn't ever match those things up. So I actually do have a question I wanted to ask you, because I think a lot of Mormons love that Jesus I just described. But the church that they get their edification from, that they listen to these prophets, they watch conference like my parents did over the weekend, they like that Jesus I just described, that very self-sacrificial, loving God. But the one that they're worshiping at conference, how do I get through to Mormons that that's not the same version of God at all? You're talking about a church that has nothing to do with that self-sacrificial Jesus.
This is Denver Snuffer's point.
Is it? Okay.
This is also Grant Palmer's point, that Mormon Jesus sucks.
Well,
basically,
they would have to get a Bible that's printed in language that they can read. So they'd have to get like a NIV or a Cambridge or something. And then they'd have to read the New Testament.
Because they just haven't. They don't know.
I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm trying to say they really don't understand, because they've used a King James Bible and they've just proof text, pulled things out of context.
But also the Book of Mormon is superior. So the Bible's de-emphasized. So it's the Book of Mormon Jesus.
Right. Well, and I've said before, I don't like Paul very much, but the church doesn't either. So they have to, especially they have to take different things and de-emphasize some things, because they can't accept the book either, because they don't, like you're saying, Jesus was very clear. If you're a righteous person and you want to go to the next level, what do? You sell everything you have. Jesus he didn't mince words about money.
It's easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. Render
unto Caesar what is Caesar's. He opted out of the systems. He rejected the monetary system. Why did he? And this is the one of the problems that American Christians have, and I'm about to piss off your audience again. American Christians have, and in particular evangelicals and Mormons, because they've wedded the principles of American capitalism so much with Christianity, but it doesn't bear out. There is nothing Jesus said anywhere that would promote capitalism. Jesus was a rejecter of the capitalistic systems. So you've got somebody who is very clear. What do you do when you want to follow Jesus? You simplify. You get rid
Sell everything.
You get rid of money.
And follow me.
And then you take care of the people who need to be taken care of. The lowest. Prostitutes have always been the lowest. And Jesus was clear about that.
Not because they're, quote, immoral, but because they're desperate, and that's the only way they're feeding themselves, right?
Because they're human beings. Yeah. When I read the New Testament, Jesus was saying, these are my children. They're human beings. Yeah. People deserve to have a life because they're alive.
And that's what I was going to say. You think about like the parable of the guy dying on the side of the road, who passes by. What's
Good Samaritan?
Good Samaritan, right? Like you think about how the Utah Saints likely responded to these parties that were lost, right? You said it, right? How did they, when they find out that they've got some people, struggling in the Willie and the Martin Handcart Company, how do they respond?
They were out within 12 hours. The people.
Yeah.
They were heading back east. They were going to go rescue them.
What's a little bit different now is you go to Mormons today and say thousands of, Sam Young says thousands and thousands of your little girls and boys and young men and young women are getting sexually abused. And the Mormons go, how's BYU doing today? and you say, whoa, our suicide rates, our death by suicide rates, LGBT are skyrocketing 3 times the national average. And they're like, oh my gosh, General Conference is coming up. Aren't we excited? Like, there seems to be a numbness now to the an opposite of the Good Samaritan impulse, where you're walking by the person dying on the side of the road as an Orthodox Mormon today, and basically saying, that's not going to help me get my Tesla, or that's going to not help me upgrade to my McMansion in Draper, or it's not going to help me get an elective surgery that I want. It's like the Good Samaritan fable has gone by the wayside, and modern Utah Mormons too often just yawn and then go buy their next designer purse.
It's easier to label things communism than to actually think critically and empathetically. Like, that's how I would put it. You just go, well, if I did that, that's communism. That they need to pull themselves up by their
Well, I'm
bootstraps
just
or whatever.
saying,
Yeah.
modern Mormons seem numb to the pain and suffering of other people. John Larsen comes on this podcast every time he comes on, and he's in tears about the state of the world, the state of the environment, the state of, the Willie and Martin Handcart Company. You have empathy, but somehow it's gotten worse in the past 150 years because so many Mormons are now anesthetized to the pain and suffering of others, and they're just worrying about how to get to the next level of conspicuous consumption. I don't know. Am I wrong?
No, but it's worse. I remember you're talking about when Prop 20 and Prop 8, and I'll mingle this story, but I can get the gist of it right. There was a debate down at UVU between, I think it was Millett or someone, one of those apologists, and a critic. And they were talking about the suicide rate. And the apologist said, give an apologetic response, said, well, not everybody in Utah is a Mormon. You can't blame the suicide rate on us. Well, the church claims that 70% of the state is Mormon. So if the church has if Utah has a suicide rate that's 3 times the population, the general number in the United States, and all of that comes from people who aren't Mormons, the 30%, then living next to Mormons drives people to suicide at such a rate that it will adjust for the entire population numbers, right? So their answers they give make them even worse. Because and I think that the reason I bring up that story, because when you tell the average Mormon, when Sam says, hey, there's kids being molested by bishops or whatever, well, not good bishops. No true Scotsman would molest a kid. No true Mormon would do that. If somebody's, and it's the same thing they did with the poor people dying out on the plains. Well, he didn't really, some 16-year-old kid who's confused by his own sexuality, rejected by his dad. Well, he just didn't have enough faith. So the solutions they give are worse than the original problem.
It's so hard.
I'm sorry. There's nothing great about this, but it's important that we know. It's important that we tell the story.
Well, John, we're getting a lot of feedback. Our believe it or not, our audience right now is as large as it's been all night. We've got 660 people joined
At 2 hours in?
either through YouTube or Facebook, and the comments are streaming in overwhelmingly that people are loving this conversation. Carah, am I right? Or
Yeah, I love reading the comments. Everyone is, we get a little bit afraid, like, oh, we don't want to get too ranty, but I think they love the ranty. So,
well, let me just ask this, because one of the I want to close maybe with try and close on a constructive, positive note.
Can I ask one more question though, before
sure.
we do any kind of wrap up? Something's been on my mind this whole entire time is from listening to your polygamy podcast. That's where I first learned about women basically being sex trafficked across the plains. And I was curious, I didn't ask you at the time, but it's still on my mind, about when you said that it was 3/4 women on these handcart companies. Were some of these women who were like kind of bought and sold and paid for to get them out as polygamist wives out west? Was that anyone that was in that?
Missionaries openly talked about in their journals and in their letters, so in sources known, openly talking about looking for wives out there with wives at home. So it's hard to estimate how much of it was, but yes. And Heber Kimball and those guys talk about, all the pretty ones. Like, so they would come down and like try to, yeah. So it was definitely sex trafficking. Was there a correlation between the Martin Company and having more women because of that? I can't answer that. I can say these were kind of the last, the stranglers, the people who were sick and infirmed and blind and didn't have. So in 1856, if you're a woman, a widow or you'd gotten pregnant, there wasn't a lot for you. So these missionaries come in and offered you salvation and offered to get you out to Zion. It would be a very seductive message.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was just curious why there were so many women, but yeah.
I have a great grandmother who was an infant in Scandinavia, and the mother of my relative gave her to one of the missionaries to bring back because she was so poor she didn't have anything. So and then eventually the true mother came out, and they were in San Pete County somewhere that they didn't have like a big family thing, but they gave her a home and whatever. But it just speaks to the destitute nature of your own existence, that you're willing to hand your baby to these missionaries to take halfway across the world. These people are desperate people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been reading a little bit about how, Facebook and Twitter and, social media, modern social media basically profits off of outrage. Yeah. How they profit off of polarization. They profit off of outrage. And if you want to get a lot of views, if you want to make money on social media, then just pick really polarizing, controversial topics and get everybody angry. Mm-hmm. And that's what wins. Yep. And I don't want Mormon stories. Like, I love having you on. Our listeners love having you on. These are super important things to talk about. And I don't want us to just be brokers of outrage, right? So what can we do? John Larsen, Carah Burrell, John DeLynn, Brent, feel free to jump in. What in the heck? What do we do with all this outrage so we're not just peddling outrage, feeding, throwing red meat to the wolves? What can we do to convert this knowledge and this outrage into something constructive? John, I'm going to let you go first. Carah, you're next.
Wolves that are watching, don't get offended. He didn't mean that.
Well, Carah, you look like you've got an answer queued up.
I don't. I just wanted to say that there are some people who donate to Mormon stories, and John just called them wolves.
I think that.
What can we do?
What can we do?
I think if you listen to the arc of Mormon stories or even Mormon expression, it's not about outrage. Outrage happens, and I will admit, I use outrage to cut through the noise. The problem is I'm up against a $100 billion, nay, $1 trillion organization.
Hundreds of billions at least.
Who can buy up every spot and put markers for whatever they want. They own the Oregon Trail. The church does. I mean, if you go along the Platte River, there is marker after marker after marker, honoring Mormon or Mormon stuff. They have these big youth conferences. Which what does this operation cost? What is the annual budget for getting all those kids out there into Wyoming? It's got to be. It's 8 figures for sure, right? You have been trained and propagandized to accept this, to dismiss any criticism, to not read anything that's not faith promoting. So sometimes we need the outrage to cut through the noise. The problem you're pointing out is that's become universal. So the only way to get your voice heard is through outrage, and we respond to that, and it's terrible. But, and I'll admit, I use outrage because who the fuck am I? I'm nobody. Right? But people listen to me because I'm shouting into the wind, right? I'm outraged, and it cuts through the noise. But I think the message that I've given is don't stay here. Don't stay here in an outraged position. You use it to deconstruct, use it to understand, use it to develop empathy, and then move on and build something. I think I've been clear in that message. We need people to build back better. I have no interest in talking to Mormons. If you're a Mormon listening, I'm just allowing it, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to people who've already figured out that there's something deeply wrong. And I'm validating your decision. I'm showing you that what you're doing is correct. So that's where the outrage becomes useful. But John, you are right. Society is too much outrage, and we have to build something else. All we're doing is tearing everything down. I mean everything. I get in my car, and what am I doing? I'm burning fossil fuels. I'm burning them. I'm destroying them. I mean, it's just metaphoric. We're just tearing everything. We're burning everything, and we have to stop.
Yeah.
But one of the ways to stop is to get rid of these institutions like Facebook and the Mormon Church.
This message brought to you by Facebook. Okay, Carah.
Bigger picture, there's petitions, there's rallies, there's things that you can do on a local scale, but the way I think is in terms of dogmatic, authoritarian systems and views and things that confine people. And so if we know that dogma only changes and this church's stranglehold on its members that needs to be nuanced, if people want to be Mormon, they need to know that it should be kind of cafeteria, it should be as healthy as possible, that it needs to be nuanced, and that can only happen from outside in and bottom up. So we provide this platform for people to be educated about the ways that the church has changed under pressure, because that's the way that we know that it only happens. So to educate yourself on these topics, take that. There's 655 of you in the chat. If you remember your Mormon multi-level marketing, you tell a friend, and you tell a friend, and you tell a friend, and you become somebody who knowledge is power. You have gained more knowledge about this church, so you better know how to nuance it and break down the dogma so it doesn't have a control over people. That's how I think. And then just generally, you need to be freed of dogma. You need to be freed of black and white thinking. You need to develop empathy for people who are different than you. And I want the country filled with people who have had those channels in their brain opened up. And whether they deconstruct Mormonism and stay in it, whatever they do, I'm not telling people they should leave all religion to be smarter or whatever. I'm just saying I want a country of people in my hopes and dreams that care about this kind of stuff, that care, that want to see more and more critically thinking, empathetic fellow American citizens. So that's the big picture to me.
All right.
Love it.
And I'll just say, here's some things I think. Number one is, get educated, read books, listen to audiobooks, listen to thoughtful podcasts and YouTube channels, get healthy, work on your mental and physical health so that you can be healthy and strong, develop healthy relationships with your significant others and with your children, make your marriages and or meaningful relationships and or family relationships as strong and as healthy as possible. I think that's where it starts. And then figure out a way to make a difference in your sphere of influence. So for me, I feel like Thrive is something that I have to do to counterbalance the deconstruction that we're constantly doing. So if all I did was sort of take people's faith away and make them want to leave the church and get angry, that would not be sufficient. So what I did is I teamed up with some really excellent people. They started a nonprofit that is a legit nonprofit. Thrive is operated at a loss. The last Thrive for Women's event that we did that had 800 women there, the donors lost $8,000 that they just paid out of their own pocket to make a successful event for 800 people. And that's Clint and Jenny Martin, basically. They just did that of their own love and free will and choice. And Lisa Hacking volunteered for that. There were dozens and dozens of volunteers, volunteer speakers. And what they're doing is trying to build something new. Thrive, and this isn't really a commercial for Thrive. It's one small example. Let's not just deconstruct. Let's form friendships. Let's form community. Let's create events that give people a replacement for what religion used to provide for them. There are all sorts of Thrive volunteers who are forming Thrive Phoenix, Arizona, Thrive Portland, Oregon, Thrive Anaheim, California. And they're starting to put their names out and form little small groups, kind of like the Living Community tried to do way many years ago, and trying to foster new forms of secular community. Most of this is going to fail. All of it's going to disappear and fail. But we're experimenting and we're trying to build new ways to do life, as you used to say. Ways to make relationships, ways to support each other in our relationships. So Thrive is just one example of what people are doing right now to try and make a difference. Volunteer at Encircle. If you care about LGBT community, there's an Encircle House in Provo. There's an Encircle House in Salt Lake. There's one that's emerging in Heber. There's one emerging in Las Vegas. Find an Encircle House to volunteer at. There are so many ways that you can support organizations that align with your values and your goals. Don't stop paying tithing if you've left the church. Find a new worthy nonprofit to donate to, or just find people in your family or community that need support and find ways to support them. We don't need the church to be altruistic. We don't need the church to do good and to build beautiful relationships, to support others in need, and to build healthy communities. So, and if you think about the CES letter and the massive impact that that's had, or Mormon Expression podcast and the massive impact that that's had, or Radio Free Mormon, or Mormonism Live, or Bill Reel, or whatever, or Lindsay Hansen Park, Year of Polygamy, Sunstone, all that is people who became outraged, who had empathy, Carah Burrell, and they just said, I'm going to dedicate a significant part of my life to making a difference, to alleviating suffering, to educating the uneducated, to providing informed consent for the world, and to try and build a bigger and a brighter and a better future. Find your CES letter, find your Sunstone, find your Mormon Expression, find your Mormon Stories podcast, find your Thrive, whatever it is, and dedicate a portion of your life to a worthy cause. You are willing to dedicate thousands of hours and 10% of your income for decades of your life to an organization that was not worthy of your donations and support. Well, guess what? You've been freed from that. And now you have an opportunity to do the same thing, but to dedicate your time, your money, your reputation, your resources to something worthy. Don't lose the spirit of giving. Don't lose the spirit of volunteerism. Don't lose the spirit of charity. Don't get consumed by conspicuous consumption. Dedicate your life to your cause and make a difference. And that's the only way differences have ever been made on this planet. One person at a time, finding a cause, and then not giving up when it gets hard. That's my sermon.
I love it.
That was a good sermon too, John.
Is that okay?
That was so good. Yeah.
We did put the bar pretty high. We just did. But
not everyone could be John Larsen and Mormon Expression, or Jeremy Reynolds, or Lindsay Hansen Park.
Well, that was the platinum version that we all just gave you. Here's the one. Go break some rules. You want to fight the outrage? Go break some rules. Who made the rules? Somebody else.
All right. Well, it's been a fun, exciting, enraging, and uplifting couple hours, John Larsen. We're so grateful that you've been able to now for a few months bless us with your wisdom and wit and anger.
Yes.
And outrage.
Yes. Some of this is outrageous, but most of it is just weird and kooky, and it's interesting in and of itself. And this stuff is part of the American experience.
And I think it's hopeful ultimately, because when you wake up, when you become enlightened, the world is your oyster. The gift of a Mormon faith crisis is the rest of your life. And that's what's hopeful about this, is we can make our lives and our communities whatever we want. It's just up to us. And that's why this is hopeful in my mind.
We can. And another maybe less intense is you can make yourself a better person by just taking it easy and consuming less. You just slow down, eat less, use less, spend more time watching the sunset. You'll be happier. The world will be happier.
I love it. And be kind. Don't be a dick, as John Larsen would say. Just don't be a dick.
Yeah.
Really quickly, a couple really quick things. So many of you have stepped up to support John Larsen appearing on this episode and the Mormon Expression Project. If you want to support more John Larsen on Mormon Stories podcast, we do pay him for these episodes. We do pay to keep the Mormon Expression library available. Please donate at mormonstories.org/Mormon Expression. You can become a monthly donor to the Mormon Expression Project. And John hopefully will be able to keep coming on for a long, long time. And we'll keep that library going. So please support that. I do want to just do a quick shout out to, we're doing a Faith Crisis Retreat, me and Natasha and Margie, in a couple weeks. It's October 15th, 16th, and 17th. If you're in a faith crisis, if your marriage is on the rocks, if you're struggling to raise your kids after the church, if you are struggling to communicate with believing family and friends, 2.5 full days of coaching and support and group therapy when you're in need in Provo-Orem area. Just go to thrivebeyondreligion.com/events, sign up for the retreat. If you can't afford to come to this retreat, email us at thrivebeyondreligion@gmail.com. We will find donors to pay your way. What we need is you just to say, hey, I want to come to this. I need the help. I can't afford it. Here's what I can pay. We will find people to make it so you can come. And these are not for-profit events. These events are run net at a loss, but they're just here to help you. We're going to be doing this event. We would love to have you show up. And of course, November 14th in the Salt Palace, Thrive Day 2021. Carah's going to be there with a bunch of TikTokers. Meet Bill Reel, meet Radio Free Mormon, meet Sarah Edmondson, former NXIVM survivor, participant in the HBO series The Vow, co-host of A Little Bit Culty. She'll be there. Lance Allred will be there, former NBA basketball player, first legally deaf NBA basketball player, played with LeBron James, along with many other amazing voices. Come, celebrate, find friends, forge community, support these sorts of things so that we can create what's next. That's what Thrive is an attempt to create what's next. Please support these sorts of things if you can. And support Carah Burrell.
Yeah, support me.
Thanks, Carah.
It's kind of nice to have Carah around, don't you think, John?
For sure. She's doing all the work. We just think her like two old ladies.
Carah's doing all the real work. And
just
your
taking it
donations to
all in.
mormonstories.org, becoming a monthly donor there, makes Carah able to be a part of this podcast. So please support Mormon Stories, become a monthly donor at mormonstories.org. And again, we're just a couple ragtag little group. Literally, this organization brings in a few $100,000 a year, and we're confronting a hundreds of billions of dollar organization, effectively $1 trillion organization. There's only a couple organizations that are standing up against the church. We only can do this because you support us. So please keep supporting us. And thank you. Thank you to everyone who donates and supports us. Thanks to everyone who comments on YouTube and on Facebook, subscribing to us, liking us, sharing this, commenting. It all helps the algorithms. So we love this live audience. Thanks to everyone who donated through Super Chat today on YouTube. Those types of things make a big
Thanks,
difference
Jolene.
as well. Did we just get another donation? All right.
She just said, I love Carah. So I love Jolene.
Yeah.
I do not believe Dolly Parton's song about you.
All right. Well, John Larsen, will you come back next month?
Next month. I don't know what the topic is yet, but something great.
Okay. We are. You did put out the call for the Jaredite barge.
Yeah, we've had some help.
If somebody wants to support that, what do they do?
Go on to the ex-Mormon Reddit and they can search for the thread.
Will you add that to the show notes, Carah? The John Larsen post on ex-Mormon Reddit where you're soliciting support to do research for what episode? The sequel to How to Build a Transoceanic Vessel.
The ask has been to discuss and take apart the barges the way we did. So we really want to do our homework and determine, well, if it's 2200 BC, what would be the average weight of a cow? How much water would they drink a day? How much fodder would they drink a day? How much shit do they do? And so we're going to figure out what size the boats have to be.
The Jaredite barges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. That'll be fun.
344 days.
In a vessel that's tight unto a dish.
Yeah. So if you'd like to help look some of these things up so we can compile it together and make a really, the idea is to make a really solid case, and do our homework, you know.
And to bring our boyfriend Kelly Lang on to maybe as a submarine commander to help provide some insight. Right.
So much fun. I just want to have him read the Book of Mormon and just be like, thoughts, Kelly?
He'll be able to tell us how much it stank.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys be good to each other, be kind to each other, channel your outrage into healing and growth for yourself, for your families, and for our community. Don't just get stuck on the outrage. Have the outrage motivate you to build a beautiful life for yourself, for your family, and to turn this shit sandwich into something beautiful.
Right. Yeah.
Is that right?
Agreed.
All right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you guys all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Carah, you're awesome.
You
Thanks
guys are
so much.
awesome. Bye, everyone.
John, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Stay safe. Break some rules.
All right. Bye, everybody. Take care.